For the second time in 2 days, hazard pay looks like it's in hazard zone because of comments coming out of the White House. Hey everybody, this is LALATE with a second stimulus check and stimulus package update. Thanks for tuning in to LALATE for this update about hazard pay. That $10,000 from the federal government under the HEROES Fund of the HEROES Act that would be paid to essential workers who worked during the pandemic. We've been receiving your comments and we've been reviewing them and we'll be going over them shortly in general, but I want to get to the shocking news today, which is simply just deeply troubling. And what's troubling is the following. As you know, I've been detailing the opponents and the proponents about hazard pay. And what I want to go over first today is what hit in the last few hours. Steve Mnuchin is really the only one who's in town. The White House is in town. The members of the Trump administration are in town. Steve Mnuchin is in town. And Steve Mnuchin is making the rounds of talk radio and news radio. Congress is out of town. They're on vacation. So there's no one to really talk about hazard pay except me and Steve Mnuchin. You got to choose between one of the two of us. And Steve Mnuchin is avoiding the subject. He's avoiding the subject for the second day in 2 days in a row, which is deeply troubling. But what's more troubling is new statements from him about what the White House thinks for a second stimulus package, which is doesn't want to give it, doesn't want to give money for this, doesn't want to give money for that, doesn't want to give money for these things, doesn't want to give money for those things. The latest twist today is that Steve Mnuchin is relying upon the National Bureau of Economic Research paper released minutes ago that says that people who were unemployed during the pandemic allegedly made out like a bandit and made a lot more money than they made when they were employed. Steve Mnuchin saw the report. Whether or not it's true or correct, I don't like the report because it's not substantiated with anything very clear. But Steve Mnuchin saw that report and sort of grabbed onto it and says, that's exactly why we're not going to give benefits to people going forward. They're making too much money. They want to stay at home and collect a lot more money. The report is quite horrible. It says unemployed janitors collected 158% of their pay by being unemployed, basically saying that they made 158% more being unemployed than being employed. Why I'm going right to janitors? You know why. Janitors are part of the hazard pay. Janitors were cleaning services that I detailed as one of the essential workers that qualify for hazard pay. So what's going on here and what am I saying? What I'm saying is that if Steve Mnuchin doesn't want to pay $600 a week to unemployed janitors or to janitors who worked for a few weeks during the pandemic and then became unemployed, do you think Steve Mnuchin wants to pay $10,000 to them? I don't think so. And so here we go. We have the White House trying to really push back on giving money to people. The National Bureau of Economics Research paper didn't just talk about non-essential workers, it talked about essential workers. And it said that, some of them worked during the pandemic, aka essential workers. Some of them got salary, aka essential workers. And some of them then became unemployed, aka essential workers, but made out allegedly as bandits, collecting more money in unemployment benefits than they had as employed. Well, okay, it's one report. It says one thing. It's in its own universe. But Steve Mnuchin came out of left field and says, I see that report. That gives me more reason not to give any of these second stimulus packages to these people. Now, he did not mention hazard pay, but ultimately he was talking about specifically, and he said specifically, $600 per week from the federal government, FPUC. He doesn't want to give those unemployed janitors $600 a week from the federal government. Well, you can do the math. $13 an hour, up to $10,000 is a lot more money than $600 per week. If the White House doesn't want to pay people who worked during the pandemic as essential workers an additional, and that get unemployed, $600 a week, then they really don't want to pay them $10,000. It is that troubling, and it comes 24 hours after Steve Mnuchin said that he would not support a second stimulus check if it was given to everyone. He didn't want a second stimulus check to be given to people who made a certain amount of money over 2019. He wouldn't say the number. Mitch McConnell said the number is 40,000. Steve Mnuchin said he would not backdoor himself or pigeonhole himself into a number. But he said he did not want everyone to get a second stimulus check. Well, here we go again. The hazard pay bill pays $10,000 for essential workers who worked during the pandemic at $13 an hour, up to $10,000, if they made anywhere between $0 and $100,000 in 2019. If they made over $100,000 in 2019, they would get $5,000 on the hazard pay bill. You see where I'm going with this? Steve Mnuchin doesn't like people who make $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000 a year. He doesn't want them to have any stimulus package. He doesn't care how much you were an essential worker during the pandemic. He doesn't care if you're a grocery worker who's trying to put people's food on their table. He doesn't care if you're a shipper or a lab technician or a nurse. He doesn't want to pay you money. And it's very, very disconcerting. It comes in it's two statements from him in less than 24 hours. And if he doesn't want to pay you $600 per week for FPUC, he really doesn't want to pay you $10,000 for hazard pay. So where are we? Where we are is really tea leaves. And I'm not going to do tea leaves. I don't do tea leaves. If you're new to this channel, you'll learn very quickly I don't do tea leaves. I just tell you what's going on and what's coming out of people's mouths. We know now the White House does not want to really give any type of sizable amount of money to people under second stimulus check in an individual person's capacity. We know, as we sit here today, that hazard pay does not conflict with a second stimulus check. A couple of viewers have asked me that. No, it doesn't. So if they agreed that every U.S. citizen was going to get a $1,200 second stimulus check, and they also agree you're going to get hazard pay if you qualify, one does not conflict with another. That's a good thing. Hazard pay doesn't conflict with anything as written. It doesn't conflict with PUA or PPP. It doesn't conflict with anything as written. But where we are today is the White House is starting to say, hey, we're just not going to allow money of any decent sum going to people. It's really quite discouraging. But here's the bright side. It's literally only one person. It's Steve Mnuchin. It's literally only one person. If I sat here and told you that Larry Kudlow, who basically no one in this channel likes, he's up there with Mitch McConnell on the unpopularity charts. If I told you Larry Kudlow said 15,000 things yesterday, you would say, who cares what Larry Kudlow says? Who cares what Mitch McConnell says? Well, Steve Mnuchin is a little bit more likable, and so people sometimes tend to accept what he's saying, but ultimately, the net result is it's only the White House. You have the Democrats and you have the Republicans in the Congress, and you have the White House, which ultimately can veto the bill. But you have three different forces, and those three different forces, only one is in town. Congress is out on vacation. They're just not in town. They're not available for news reporters to ask and answer questions about a second stimulus package. So the person who's eating up all the air, the oxygen for news reports is Steve Mnuchin, perhaps enjoying it, but he has no one to come back and say something to the contrary. So if you're watching this video and you're wondering what's going to happen to my hazard pay, I'm entitled to hazard pay. I worked during the pandemic. I should get hazard pay. $13 an hour on top of what I got is nothing. I risked my life by working during the pandemic. I should be compensated for it. I'm not a welfare state. I worked. What should you think? You should think that so far it's still a bill. It's still before members of Congress. It has still gone nowhere. And you have the White House really trying to push back. Well, that is all it is at the moment, push back. Ultimately, what's important for you to know, and I really like this, is a lot of viewers, since watching the videos this week on hazard pay, which a lot of you said are so important, they are important. Hazard pay is so important. Some of you have reached out to your employers, your boss. Someone said they reached out to their taxi dispatcher, which I loved. and said, what do you think about this? I watched this video. What do you think about hazard pay? And would you apply for hazard pay for us? And they said yes. They said yes. It's really great. So if you have an employer, if you still work for that employer who employed you for hazard pay, and I'm only saying that because you see them on a daily basis. I'm not saying that you don't qualify otherwise. I'm just saying you happen to see them on a daily basis. Next time you see him or her, say, hey, what about this hazard pay? Will you apply for hazard pay for us for what we did under the during the pandemic? If they don't know what hazard pay is, you explain it to them. You explain to them what I'm explaining to you, and ask them if they'll do it. Ultimately, it's important for you to start that conversation with your employer. What I always try to do is empower my viewers, and empowering you includes giving you the information, the tools, and the education to know and say, to go to your employer and say, hey, I think all of us qualify for hazard pay. We're all essential workers. We are all XYZ. I heard the video. I heard the HEROES bill. He read me the HEROES bill definition of essential workers. We're all essential workers. Are you going to apply for us for hazard pay if the bill gets approved on August 8th? Will you do it? And, you know, if you got 100, 200, 300 of your coworkers asking your employer, more power to you. Start the discussion now. Don't wait. Start the discussion now. Because ultimately, if you start to have this discussion now with your employer about the importance of hazard pay, it's teed up if it's passed. We have a lot of second stimulus check questions and videos today that are so important. One of the most important one, and is going to be the most detailed one, is the one coming up next. PUA, unemployment and benefits, and FPUC. It's important not so much for FPUC, PUA, and UI, but for what Steve Mnuchin said. What Steve Mnuchin said and what the new economic data reveals, that allegedly, people are making a cat's meow, a cash run, a bonanza of moolah, being unemployed rather than being employed. I didn't write the report. I'm just reporting what the report says. You need to watch that, because Steve Mnuchin immediately jumped on it, latched onto it, and is now, basically framing it on his wall. And it's very, very troubling. As always, stay at LA for more.